Welcome to this week's episode of Detroit Lions Review and Preview. For everybody, I hope you had a fantastic holiday. If you're celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas. If you are celebrating Hanukkah, Happy Hanukkah. If you're celebrating Kwanzaa, Happy Kwanzaa. And anything else you might be celebrating, just a fantastic time. Hopefully to spend time with your family and friends, and I hope everybody's enjoying this time of the season. There were a couple of football games on yesterday. Neither of them were too interesting. Both teams that won, Kansas City and Baltimore, did so quite convincingly. So a little bit disappointing if you were watching football, but nonetheless, good if you're a Ravens fan or a Chiefs fan. Chiefs are off to another fantastic start, and they're looking good for the playoffs. Seem to just keep getting stronger as the season goes on, and that's what championship teams do. Okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about last week's game. So, if anybody does watch my show regularly, all 20 of you or 10 or whatever it is, you know that I got egg on my face this week. I completely underestimated the Lions, their resilience. They weren't going to lose to a team that, like the Bears, who clearly were underperforming, especially since they fired their coach. But even prior to that, they were a bit of a mess. We know what happened on Thanksgiving with the timeout. They could have beaten the Lions. And I think I just overestimated the whole thing. And as I said, I very much underestimated the Lions. I very underestimated the resilience that Dan Campbell brings to the team, which he absolutely does. And shame on me. Anyway, it was, just a very solid, get back on track game. And, I think they'll be fine in terms of the regular season, or certainly for this week, which we'll talk about in a minute. Fantastic week by Jared Goff, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jameson Williams. Those three in particular had a fantastic week. Jameson Williams, of course, with that big touchdown, him to get open. Jared Goff, what a throw he made. He threw 3 touchdowns on the day. Just another great day. I mean, the man's having a fantastic year. And if the Lions are going to surprise us in the playoffs in spite of all the injuries, he's going to have to be the guy. I don't, as everyone knows, I'm a big fan of Jared Goff. I think he's the best quarterback the Lions ever had. There's no question in my mind about that. But I don't know that he can do that for 2 or 3 playoff games in a row, but we'll get there. Anyway, top 5 offensive players last week, according to Pro Football Focus. Ragnow was number 1, so he had an off week against the Bills. So that's very promising that he did so well last week. Definitely they need him. Jameson Williams was ranked number 2. Kevin Zeitler, number 3. Jahmyr Gibbs, number 4. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, who definitely had a very solid game, was number 5. How Jared Goff, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, over 300 yards, is not in the top 5. Again, I bring up these Pro Football Focus ratings because they're interesting. I don't know if I always agree with them. Bottom 5, just FYI, Brock Wright apparently had the worst game of everyone. Tim Patrick, well, didn't catch a pass last week. Craig Reynolds just didn't really get much of a chance. But this is a shocker. Penei Sewell, number 4, so 4th worst offensive player. You don't expect to see that guy. And the number 5 was Sam Laporta, who I thought, he did a great job getting open and catching the touchdown pass on that trick play that everybody was talking about. I thought he had a nice enough day. Top 5 defensive player. This is kind of promising. Jack Campbell was the number 1 rated player, and if the Lions are, going to pull this off in the playoffs with being down so many players, he's a guy that's going to have to come up big. But the second guy, Mitchell Agude. So, guys are stepping up, and, hopefully we'll see that. You look at the bottom 5, you see a bunch of guys who weren't even on the roster at the beginning of the year: Ezekiel Turner, Patrick O'Connor, Trevor Nowaski. So, it's not surprising to see that these guys don't have great grades. They're not great football players, and the Lions have their hands tied. So we know that if they're going to do anything in the playoffs, we know it's going to have to be all up to the offense. That's just all there is to it. But anyway, nice win last week. And this week they've got the 49ers. The 49ers, I'm going to talk a little bit about the series. They are leading the series 40, 28, and 11. But what's really kind of skewing those numbers is you look at the last 20 games the 49ers and Lions have played. The Lions are 2-18 against the 49ers. And sometimes it's hard for me to believe that because I do recall, as a younger fan, the Lions did pretty well against the 49ers, but that turned around the mid-1980s, and then that's when that 2-18, and then I actually went to a game, I'm going to say about 7 or 8 years ago, and that was one of the few they won. And then I do remember the Monday Night Football game. That was one of those games where Scott Mitchell actually had a good game, and they won on a missed field goal. But other than that, I mean, it was just loss after loss after loss. And it didn't matter how good or how bad these 49er teams. I remember in the 0-16 year, a quarterback, J.T. Sullivan, it might be the only start he ever won in his life. But the Lions were so bad that year that J.T. Sullivan had his way against the Lions. They haven't beaten the 49ers on the road since 1975. So hopefully this is the week that they turn that around. So I'll just talk a little bit about the last two times that they actually won in San Francisco. We don't need to go over last year's NFC Championship game. Too depressing, so let's forget that. Let's go all the way back to 1974, and I was just a kid. So 1974 was an interesting year. Don McCafferty, who was a Super Bowl winning coach with the Baltimore Colts, came to the Lions in 73. And he died suddenly of a heart attack at the beginning of 1974. So the Lions thought they had a Super Bowl winning coach, and they had to escalate one of their assistants, Rick Forzano, and they promptly lost their first 4 games that year. And they finally won their 5th game, and that was against the 49ers. They won 17-13, and this actually got them going, that they then, after starting off the season with 4 losses, they then went in with 4 wins and finished the season 7-7. So they had kind of a... They had a 7-3 finish that year, but because they got off to such a bad start, they were never in the playoff race or anything like that. 1975, however, under Rick Forzano, they actually were in the playoff race, and one of their wins was against the 49ers, and it was the last time they ever won in San Francisco. The quarterback was Joe Reed. So back in 1975, in the mid-70s, it was kind of back and forth between Bill Munson and Greg Landry. Mostly because Greg Landry, because he used to run a lot, used to get hurt a lot. But then sometimes Bill Munson would come in, and sometimes it was on purpose. They said, "Oh, okay, it's not going good," so they put Munson in. He was more of a drop back QB. But they both went down with injuries, and they had to start Joe Reed, who that was the only time he ever had significant starting experience, and he actually had to play quite a bit that year in '75. Interesting, in the 70s, 75 was really one of the few years the Lions actually were kind of alive for a wild card spot. They were actually 6-3 going into their Thanksgiving game, and they promptly lost that, and then they ended up being 7-7. So Joe Reed, being not such a great quarterback, did catch up with them. But this particular game against the 49ers, he had a big day. He threw for 2 touchdowns, and a couple of weeks ago, I brought up an old Lion named Dexter Bussey. Well, he had a big game on this particular day. He had 78 yards rushing and 71 yards pass receiving, including a 65-yard touchdown reception. So running back, pretty big deal in the day, from Joe Reed. And Lem Barney that day, Hall of Fame defensive back, had 2 interceptions. And then you had Ed O'Neill, who was a longtime linebacker for the Lions. If anybody has ever seen the movie Something for Joey, he's actually mentioned in that film because he was on Penn State when John Cappelletti won the Heisman. But anyway, I believe he was a first-round draft pick of the Lions. He played linebacker with them for quite a bit of the 70s. And on that particular day, he had a 49-yard defensive return for a touchdown on a fumble recovery. Okay, so talk about this week's game. I'm not going to say too much about it. It is what it is. Lions haven't won since 1975. I mean, they've got a gift-wrapped opportunity. They have a beaten-up 49ers team in so many ways. There's no Ed McCaffrey. That has hurt that team significantly. Brock Purdy has not been quite as good this year. So he's starting to show a little bit why he was such a late-round pick, although team's been very injured. I mean, he certainly has done pretty well for them. They have to make the decision in the offseason, are they going to pay him or not? And if they don't pay him, he's done well enough that somebody's going to eventually. But anyway, last week, I basically, as I said, I had egg on my face. I said that the Lions were going to lose to the Bears. And this week, I do expect them to beat the 49ers. So there's a few reasons for that. First of all, the 49ers are one of those teams that, they are going to have a losing record. They are 6-9. Their best they can do is 8-9. And a team that's used to competing for a Super Bowl, they've been in the Super Bowl, I believe it's 2 of the last. They were definitely competing for the Super Bowl last year. I believe it's 2 of the last 3 years, if not the last 2 years. 2 of the last 3 years. They've been competing for a Super Bowl. Suddenly they're competing to go 8-9. They don't have much motivation, and I find it particularly affects teams that are used to winning. So I expect the Lions. I just don't expect to see that great an effort. They'll try, of course, because they're But anyway, um, the other thing is, and this is a big one in betting, they had something last week called the Dream Crusher game. So if they were going to have maybe one last shot at the playoffs, they were going to have to win their final three. So had they won last week against Miami, I would have thought they had a better chance to beat Detroit, because then they could still potentially go 9-8, and maybe somehow they'd squeeze out that last playoff berth. Although I'm pretty sure that Washington's going to win at least 10 games if they haven't already. So I expect them to, as I said, they had the Dream Crusher game. And the bottom line is, Lions have just been much better this year. So I think they'll win this week. Problem the Lions are going to have is that the Lions now hope, here's the best scenario. The best scenario is that Green Bay beats Minnesota on Sunday, because if that happens, then the Lions are playing for the division. I think they're playing for the bye in the first round for the number one seed, but they definitely will wrap up the division. And I think they wrap up the division and the first seed if Green Bay can beat Minnesota. The problem is, Green Bay is playing for nothing. Green Bay is a wild card team. That's it. That's what are they playing for? So I don't know how good a chance it's going to happen. Minnesota's been playing very well. So here's where I'm coming from. That is the Lions' best shot at the number one seed in the division, because with all the injuries, I do not want the Lions going for, even at Ford Field, I don't want the Lions going for a winner-take-all game against the Vikings right now, because the Vikings are playing extremely well. And as well as the Lions have done this year, they are just not as healthy as the Vikings. And the Vikings right now, they do have the defensive personnel, because it's only going to take them, just like Buffalo did, just stop the Lions on a couple of drives. So we'll talk about that game next week. So for now, let's root for Green Bay. So rarely do we say that, but we're rooting for Green Bay on Sunday. And then we're rooting for the Lions to break that long streak against the 49ers on the road. So we'll see how that goes. Enjoy the game, everybody. And we'll see if we're talking about a winner-take-all game next week, or hopefully we're talking about a game that means nothing and the Lions can rest players. And if that option is available, we'll go there on the Dan Campbell thing and what we think he might do when we get there. All right. Enjoy the game, everyone. Thanks for watching. Hit like, hit subscribe. Thank you.